Hi, I'm Malika Bilal, and you're in the stream. Today, a wave of African Americans are choosing to move to the African continent. But why? And what happens when they get there? Join the conversation using the hashtag AJStream, or if you're watching live on YouTube, you'll eventually see us in that box. You can leave your comments in the chat box, and you too could be in the stream.
My name is Chimamanda Adichie. I'm a writer, and I'm in the stream.
In recent years, thousands of African Americans have made the decision to, quote, return home to the African continent. Many say they want to escape the racial pressure pot of the United States, while some want to connect to the land of their ancestors. For others, countries like Ghana wooed them with an easy immigration process and the promise of a better life. Though many in African countries are welcoming of the Americans in their midst, not everyone is thrilled by their new neighbors. So joining us to talk about all of this in Accra, Ghana, Mohamida El-Muhajir. She's a marketing and media consultant. She also made the documentary film Blaxit about the migration of African Americans. In Cape Town, South Africa, Lita Sokutu. He's an anthropologist and social literacy consultant. In Namibia, Kaylin Reed Shipanga. She's a journalist and editor of the website African American in Africa. And here in our studio, Barrett Pittner, a writer and journalist focusing on race, culture, and politics in the United States. Welcome to the stream, everyone. So this is a conversation that is very hot with our audience. They love this topic, and so everyone wanted to chime in with why people might want to move to the continent of Africa. This is just one of the tweets we got. This is from Edmund, who says, it's about identity. Events like the slave trade and colonial rule almost wiped away that African identity, and thank goodness people are once again asking deep questions about that identity. Kaylin, I want to go to you with that idea, talking about the draw of what made you want to leave the U.S. and move to Namibia. I have a picture here on my laptop that I pulled up of you not too long ago, you teaching English. Talk to us about that experience and what made it so enticing for you.
But basically by the time I was about 23, 24 years old, I personally just became kind of tired and bored of America. And I just really fell in love with the energy and vibrancy that came with Black nations, especially after visiting Barbados, which is where I have matrilineal lineage. And so I basically decided that, I wanted to experience life on the African continent. And so I started doing research on the internet about ways to move to Africa. And I found out that one of the easiest ways was through volunteer teaching. And so I applied to an American organization, and that's how I ended up in Namibia. The rest is history. I ended up getting married to a Namibian. I'm now a mother here. But really just for me, it was, I personally was kind of unsatisfied with American life. And I've always felt a connection just to the continent and to my African ancestry and just to the energy of Black nations. And so it was really attractive, and it's been an intoxicating experience.
So you mentioned that I had to chuckle at tired and bored of living in America and the American context, really. So Mohamida, I want to go to you with that idea. I pulled up on my screen here an article about you, headlined Why Some African Americans Are Moving to Africa. This is from our colleague Azad Issa on the Al Jazeera English site. And you decided to move to Ghana for a one-year fellowship in 2014 and then stayed. What was behind that decision?
Well, actually, I did graduate school in Ghana in 2003, but I didn't feel like it was time for me to move yet. Lots of things weren't in place. And I came back 10 years later in 2013. I had an amazing experience. There was so much development that had happened in that time that I was like, now is the time. I applied for a fellowship. It was a one-year fellowship. I figured that would give me enough time to, get the lay of the land, see how much I liked it. And at the end of 1 year, I was like, I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. And I've been here since then.
Barrett, you heard those two experiences. What goes through your mind when you hear that?
Well, it makes a lot of sense, and because frankly, people not being enjoying living in the United States or having issues as an African American in the United States, that makes a lot of sense. And there's plenty of African Americans who have gone to countries in Europe and have felt more comfortable in Europe than they have in America. So going to Africa and feeling this connection to more African people, which doesn't necessarily mean that it's your home per se, where you go back and like you're rekindling something that you have like a very real connection that you're not saying the connection is completely gone, but the comfort level and the ability to adapt and thrive in that environment, it makes a lot of sense. And so I can see why people would be interested in doing so.
Okay, so then I want to throw a little dynamite into this conversation. Here's some people who are not so interested. This is B. McNeil, who tweets, "Definitely not. African-American blood runs in the veins and sinews of the United States. We should make this country more fair and equitable to people of color, not cut and run, so to speak." We also got a video comment from someone who thinks similarly along those lines, and she's also a former Stream guest. Serene writes sent us his video on this point. Have a listen.
As a descendant of American chattel slavery, I don't necessarily feel the need to go back to Africa, a place that I've never been, in order to reconnect with my roots, because I feel like my roots are right here in the United States, where my ancestors literally gave their lives building this country as enslaved people. They sunk their blood, sweat, and tears into this country, and I don't feel it's necessary for me to leave to find my roots.
So Baird, you wrote a piece in 2015 for Daily Beast. I pulled it up here. African Americans can't go home. And the title there is Rootless. And this is under the opinion page. But talk to us about that idea that Serene mentioned in her video comment. This is home. This is where her roots are.
Yeah, without a doubt, as an African American, this is our home. Like my family has been here for generations upon generations, and I'm as American as you can get. But the complexity of being an African American is that we've never been allowed to have the complete agency to treat this fully as our home in like the true American sense. And that will incline people to go in search of other places where they can feel they can fully exercise their agency and be themselves to the fullest. And so that brings about a complexity where you kind of have, as a culture, two environments where you can't be fully home in either one, but you do have an obligation domestically in the United States to fight for equity for African Americans. But at the same time, the colonization across the globe has made it so that Black stories, African stories don't get the representation that they need, and collectively we have to work to enhance that too. So it's a fight, domestically and internationally to elevate Black voices and strive for equality across the board. So you can't go home per se, but you do have a connection to both places that you have to, work for the betterment of all Black people.
Lisa, I want to bring you into the conversation here on that point Baird raised about you can't go home. You work with students who go to the continent, specifically South Africa, and have different experiences. Can you talk to us about that?
In essence, we work with students like American exchange students that come here for study abroad programs, but we've also worked with a lot of American international schools. And they are based here in South Africa. And what you often find is there's this desire from the white students to, serve this environment and help Africa in a very romantic sense. But on the flip side, you've got African Americans who come here and are looking for an idyllic sense of home, an idyllic sense of a reconnection with their roots, which falls a little bit shallow because the Africa and the homeland that you're looking at is messy, complex, and us people that were born and raised here are still trying to figure out themselves. And so I find that when the desire is very romantic and one that is lacking context of just on the ground what is happening within the country, it becomes problematic and at times a little bit difficult for us as local South Africans to engage with you realistically as a foreigner coming into the space to try and find something on this like spiritual mecca. It's very complicated.
Caitlin?
Well, I think that's kind of like, first of all, I think there's a misconception that I've seen thrown around that African Americans, across the board, like we don't have any insight, to what is going on the ground in African nations. There are professors at Howard University that which is my alma mater, that I know for a fact are all the way from DC, deeply engaged and aware of African politics. Of course, being on the ground in an African country, there's nothing that can replace, and also being an African or being a South African, there's nothing that can replace, that direct insight. But I think it's a little bit of a reach to sort of just kind of say that, we kind of have this shallow understanding, or shallow approach, I would say. I don't really think that's the case. And I think sometimes people just kind of underestimate the insight that African Americans, that many of us actually do have. I get it. A lot of African Americans don't know, don't have any interest in what's going on in Africa. But at the same time, there are others that do, like myself, and I think the least that can be done is just to give us a chance.
Oh, yeah.
We're starting, we're starting from, from 400 plus years, like you can't expect, I don't think you should expect us to come, and just know everything and just have a lay of the land. That's where, you can meet us halfway and we can all work together and get a better understanding. And it won't be perfect, and it will be kind of,
what I do wish to add there, just make a quick caveat, is we welcome people that wish to learn, but what I'm saying is with the students, which are particularly younger, they come in with a sense of this place will fit in this kind of box of what the motherland looks like. I mean, there are definitely many, many African American scholars that history has showed us that have an acute, nuanced awareness of the African continent. Chinua Achebe writes about James Baldwin and how his perception of Africa was nuanced, smart, and in many ways fully aware of how that 400-year history creates a gap of knowledge. So 100%. What I'm saying is the self-interrogation, which is happening from us, locals that are born and raised, needs to be extended, and a desire to learn needs to also occur with those people that are coming inside, if that makes sense.
Right.
I'm not painting with broad strokes at all.
I hear what you're saying.
Though, right?
I hear what you're saying. And you mentioned self-interrogation, and I think one of the things that came up in our community is a feeling from people on the continent that some Americans are not doing that self-interrogation as accurately and thoroughly as they need to be. Take a look at these two tweets from Lan Ray. He mentions, first of all, this isn't new, and that goes to the idea that the Back to Africa movements have been happening since the 1800s to contemporary times. He says, this is an experiment hundreds of years in the making. I have friends here in Nigeria whose surnames are Fernandez, Da Silva, etc. Their great-grandparents are returnee slaves from Brazil. They all have Yoruba first names, though, and they're completely re-assimilated. He goes on to say, I haven't come across any of them in Lagos, and frankly, I wouldn't advise them to come here. Nigeria is where dreams come to die. They'll be quickly disillusioned. In Ghana, they might find more to their taste because of its economic climate and low population. So there's one naysayer there, but I want to give that one to you, Mohamida, because I'd like you to give us an idea of what happens when you land. It can't all be rosy. What does that look like? What should people expect?
I think, it's important for African Americans to manage expectations. We have all this yearning inside, this displacement, and we want it to go away, and we think when we land, it's going to magically go away. There are going to be drummers and singers at the airport welcoming us. It's just not like that. Most people on the ground don't be in connection with African Americans. It's like if I go to Harlem or Brooklyn or somewhere, most people are like, I'm not African, they don't see a connection. So it's really up to the individual to manage their expectations, to have a more realistic idea of what's happening in modern day African cities. And then understand what you need as a person. So even for me, I know people may not see me as a long lost sister or cousin, but it doesn't matter. I know that I'm connected to this land. I know that I'm connected to these people. And that's what's important to me. It doesn't really matter what they think. Just like in America, if at one point they considered us 3/6 of a human. So I know that I'm a whole human. I'm just like here. I know I'm of African descent. And I'm here more so for the feeling and the connection that I have to the place. So it's not so much of what other people think about me. So for me, I have managed those expectations. So I have a better time and a better experience. I haven't had that crash that most people have, and then they have to build back up. So I think that's something that's very important for people who are thinking about coming here.
Kaylin, I could see you nodding there. I see all of our guests nodding there. Barrett, what did you want to say?
So I guess a key thing from an American perspective, as a country, we have a romanticized idea of foreign homelands. And when we talk about it as a nation of immigrants, and this extends to all Americans, white Americans, Asian Americans, the idea of, if you're Irish or Korean or whatever, there's a romanticized connection to where you're from. And as African Americans, even though our immigration story is vastly different, there's a yearning to have that romanticized connection to Africa. And that is, I think, when you get to Africa and you now have the reality, just like you have the reality if you go to any country, that romanticized notion needs to kind of fall away, and you have to do the legwork. You have to know a lot about the continent, the place you're going, and all the dynamics so that you can fully immerse yourself in. And I think he made a good point that for like the younger generation when they're going over there, they're very prone to have the romanticized ideas of what Africa is, and there's a culture shock, and then the Africans actually have to now get the Americans to come to realize this is what the country's like, this is what's happening. And I think the sooner we can have a more realistic view of our struggle domestically and internationally with regards to Africa and the perspectives we need to have, the more capacity we'll have to thrive in whatever way we decide to go into Africa, whether which countries they are and the dynamics that happen there.
Jump in.
Kaylin?
Yeah, if I could just jump in. I mean, if we're talking about students, I don't think that the expectations should be super high on students coming to Africa, study abroad, or whatever it is that they're doing. I just think that's a bit unrealistic. I mean, I came here, I moved to Namibia at 26 years old. And to be honest, I've been here for over almost eight to 9 years. And it has taken me a long time, and it's still not perfect, just for me to, understand my feelings and, continually manage my own expectations. So, I really don't think that, you're going to find, this perfect African-American, adaptation or entrance into the African continent, particularly with students. I hope that you don't hold them too high and just be patient with them, because it really seriously is a process. Even for me, I came as an adult, and I'm still learning every day, little things, big things. It's really a process, and it does take patience, and it's not pretty all the time. And, so, yeah.
Right, real quick, though, and I totally agree that, you could have certain expectations for students or, adult professionals or whatnot, but the idea of building the connection to Africa, if we're building a strong connection, we have to get past the romanticized idea and, really kind of, and the earlier the African American community can do that, regardless of, whether you're a student or you're an adult, I think the better it'll be if your goal is to visit Africa and have a really vibrant connection with the continent. So there's an American impediment as to how we perceive countries outside the United States and see it with a realistic perspective and not a romanticized one. And I think America kind of indoctrinates us to have that romanticized view.
So I'm glad you raised that. I want to bring this up. I will go to you, Lita, but I want to bring this up because this raises a good point. We're talking about this romanticized view, and we got some Africans from people on the continent because, of course, Africa is not a country, and we did get pushback from people online who said, remember, don't just call us Africans. We're very diverse in who we are. There's this quote. This is from the article featuring you, Mohamida, and you write, you might not have electricity, but you won't get killed by the police either, talking about moving to Ghana. We got pushback because this is one person out of Nigeria who says, the chances of people killing you in Nigeria is 8 out of 10. Please don't deceive yourself. Check the hashtag #InSARS and Reform Police to verify real stories of police brutality in Nigeria. That's actually something we did a stream show about, so it is a real issue. But keeping that in mind, others are saying there is a privilege to being African American on the continent. This is from Sahara Reporters, a news site. Passport privilege and black guilt, tales of an African American expat. And this is something our community definitely relates to. Abel says, I've been telling my African American brothers and sisters that they are more privileged and protected as Americans in Africa. I'm going back to my home Ethiopia because I can be in a better position as a US educated Ethiopian than trying to find acceptance here. So that's a little pushback on that idea. Lita, I wanted to bring you in here. What are your thoughts?
Sorry, is this me now? Sorry,
It is you.
Yeah. So what I want to just add to that point is you need to understand something. When African Americans come to South Africa and interact with other Black South Africans, they're kind of exceptionalized because of the social capital and like the soft power. You know, you will have an African American engage with a Black South African whose favorite TV show is Scandal, who can sing Jay-Z lyrics off by heart, and like who has so much affinity to so much Black American pop culture that they enjoy this privilege of cool that, you know, obviously not afforded to other foreign national Africans. And so what I've noticed is how with that privilege, there's almost a responsibility to use if you want to come and like stay here and be part of the institution and part of the country, you have to use that sort of privilege you have as an American with the resources to try and better the place. Because to be honest, South Africa and like many other African countries, we have trust issues when it comes to foreigners coming into this space. And so that's a point that I really want to make, that the privilege does exist, but the privilege needs to be used to combat certain inequities within the local space that you exist in any way that you can regarding skills or resources.
So Mohammed, I wanted to bring you in. I wanted to bring Mohammed down on that point of privilege because we got this via YouTube, someone watching live. They said Ghana made a law in 2001 allowing descendants of the diaspora to get citizenship and work. And here is what that looks like. It's the right of abode granted to people of African descent in the diaspora. So there are others saying it's not just that easy. You have to have several documents and a little time frame for making sure that you can be a citizen there. But it is a welcoming announcement. Mohammed, when you see that, do you recognize that there's a privilege to being welcome to this country that's not necessarily your own?
I think there is a privilege of, being an African American. I mean, I do understand that just coming in with, dollars or, an American education, I'm not going to, act like that doesn't exist. But one of the great things about it is finally I can use my American-ness, and get the benefits because I'm not getting them at home. So finally, I can, they benefit me. So it is, to my advantage. I don't like to, I like to pretty much go as anonymous as I can. If I don't talk, no one even knows that I'm American. Even if I do talk, they just assume that I'm probably Ghanaian who was educated abroad. And I love living in that anonymity, however you say that word, you know what I'm talking about. So, I know, but I have it in my back pocket. If I need to use it, I use it. I try not to because I want to just, live as normally as possible. But, I'm definitely not going to deny that exists. And I think, like the gentleman said in South Africa, it is, it's a responsibility I need to do, and I try as much as I can, to improve my environment, to improve, and also just give people a realistic view of what African Americans are too, because I think that's the flip side. People romanticize African Americans. They see Beyonce and Jay-Z and rappers and things like that on TV, and they think that's what our life is, and I'm like, no, it's not like that, and so it's always a education that's happening on both sides.
Right. Kaylin?
Yeah, and I mean, on the flip side of that, I really do think that, maybe Africans sometimes, or South Africans, I don't want to generalize the continent, but I'll speak to the South African on the panel. Don't forget that you guys also have a privilege, I mean, there's serious power in knowing your tribe and having growing up in the rich culture that you grew up in, like the young woman before me was saying, like it's not, don't over romanticize Black American privilege, because it's not like 100% rosy. But I do hear what you're saying in terms of when we're on the continent. I mean, for me personally, I try to keep my privilege in check when I can, or stand up against my privilege when I can, whether it's someone saying, like, just recently a guy said to me, oh, I want some American sisters. I don't want any Namibian women. And I was like, I checked him, like that's not okay. I mean, it may seem like a simple thing, but just there are many different ways. And you know, in terms of African Americans coming here and becoming entrepreneurs or whatever, and just keeping social responsibility in mind. So there are definitely things that we should do.
So knowing your privilege, checking it, and making sure that you are aware of it. Unfortunately, we are out of time. I want to give a big thank you to all of our guests for this fascinating conversation and to our community for making it great. I'll end with this tweet from Bonche, who says, "I have land in Kenya to share with anyone willing to come to Africa. Our ancestors would be happy." #AJ Stream. See you online.